Government institutions. Iran is a highly centralized unitary state, but it is divided administratively into provinces, districts, sub-districts, and local areas. The Islamic Constitution of 1979 promises elected councils on each level of administration, and it also requires governors and other regional officials, who are also appointed, to consult local councils. No steps were taken to hold council elections until 1999, when President Khatami insisted on holding nationwide local elections. The election resulted in a landslide for reformists, presenting a challenge for the conservative clergy. Local elections in December 2006 supported candidates critical of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, reflecting a weakness in the president's popularity. The government structure of Iran is complex, but the most important thing to remember is that it attempts to blend theocratic ideals with democratic ones. Every structure has a purpose in terms of one or both of these principles. Juris guardianship. The Supreme Leader, the Guardian Council, the Assembly of Religious Experts, and the Expediency Council do not fit into a three-branch arrangement of government institutions. All three have broad executive, legislative, and judicial powers that allow them to supersede all other positions and bodies. They abide by the Ayatollah Khomeini's overarching principle of Velayat al-Faqih, juris guardianship, in that they have all-encompassing authority over the whole community based on their ability to understand the Sharia and their commitment to champion the rights of the people. The Constitution of 1979 specifies the duties of government institutions, including prerogatives and responsibilities of the dual executive, the Supreme Leader and the President. The Supreme Leader. This position at the top of Iran's government structure was clearly meant to be filled by the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the leader of the 1979 revolution. The Supreme Leader is seen as the imam of the whole community, and he represents the pinnacle of theocratic principles of the state. The Constitution specifically put Khomeini in the position for life and stated that after his death, his authority would pass to a leadership council of 2 or 3 senior clerics. This did not occur when Khomeini died in 1989 because his followers did not trust the clerics. So instead, they changed the constitution and selected as Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, a cleric of the middle rank, who had none of Khomeini's formal credentials. Khamenei also appointed for life and continues as Supreme Leader to the present. The Constitution gives the Supreme Leader many powers. First and foremost, he is the Faqih, or the leading Islamic jurist to interpret the meaning of religious documents and Sharia Islamic law. He links the 3 branches of government together, may meeting among them, and is charged with determining the interests of Islam. His many powers include elimination of presidential candidates, dismissal of the president, commander of the armed forces, declaration of war and peace, appointment and removal of major administrators and judges, nomination of 6 members of the Guardian Council, appointment of many non-governmental directors, such as the National Radio Television Network and semi-public foundations. Although the dual executive positions of the Iranian government may be categorized as head of state, the Supreme Leader, and head of government, the President, the Supreme Leader holds ultimate power and is far from a figurehead. The Guardian Council. A body that also represents theocratic principles is the Guardian Council, which consists of 12 male clerics. 6 are appointed by the Supreme Leader, and the other 6 are nominated by the Chief Judge and approved by the Majlis. Bills passed by the Majlis are reviewed by the Guardian Council to ensure that they conform to Sharia, and the Council also has the power to decide who can compete in elections. In 2012 and 2013, they disqualified thousands of candidates for both the Majlis and the presidential elections. Together, the Supreme Leader and the Guardian Council exercise the principle of juris guardianship, making sure that the democratic bodies always adhere to Islamic beliefs and laws. The Assembly of Religious Experts. In 1989, a smaller Assembly of Religious Experts was expanded to be an 86-man house directly elected by the people every 4 years. The Assembly is given the responsibility, along with the Supreme Leader and Guardian Council, of broad constitutional interpretation. One of the new Assembly's first actions was to elect Ali Khamenei as Khomeini's replacement as Supreme Leader. The Assembly also reserved the right to dismiss him if he was unable to fill Khomeini's shoes. So far, that has not happened. The Assembly's members were required to have a seminary degree equivalent to a master's degree, but in 1998 revisions were made that allowed non-clerics to stand for the Assembly. but the candidates are still subject to approval by the Guardian Council. In 2007, former President Hashemi Rafsanjani was picked as chairman of the assembly, a move that many thought would pose a challenge to Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and possibly even Supreme Leader Khamenei. Rafsanjani, a moderate, was Ahmadinejad's main opponent in the presidential election of 2005, and he also tends to side with pro-democracy reformers who believe the government's authority is derived from popular elections. However, in 2011, Rafsanjani was pressured to step down from his position, leaving many to speculate about how his loss of power would impact opposition movements to the government. Rafsanjani ran for president in 2013, but was disqualified by the Guardian Council. The Expediency Council. Because the Guardian Council can overturn decisions and proposals for laws made by the Majlis, the two bodies often argued fiercely during the days of the early Republic. So Khomeini created a body to referee their disputes. It began as a council with 13 clerics, including the president, the chief judge, the speaker of the Majlis, and 6 jurists from the Guardian Council. The Expediency Council eventually passed some compromise bills and was institutionalized by the 1989 constitutional amendments. Today it consists of 32 members, and it has many more powers than it had originally. For example, it now may originate its own legislation. Not all of its members today are clerics, but they are still appointed by the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei. Collectively, they are the most powerful men in Iran. The Executive. Iran does not have a presidential system, so the head of the executive branch does not have the same authority as presidents in countries that have a presidential system, such as the US, Mexico, and Nigeria. However, the president is the highest official representing democratic principles in Iran, and he functions as the head of government, while the supreme leader serves as head of state. The President and the Cabinet. The President is the chief executive and the highest state official after the supreme leader. He is directly elected every 4 years by Iranian citizens, and he is limited to 2 consecutive terms in office. Although he is democratically elected, the Constitution still requires him to be a pious Shiite who upholds Islamic principles. Some of the president's powers include devising the budget, supervising economic matters, proposing legislation to the Majlis, executing policies, signing treaties, laws, and agreements, chairing the National Security Council, selecting vice presidents and cabinet members, appointing provincial governors, town mayors, and ambassadors. All of the 6 presidents of the Islamic Republic have been clerics, except for 2, Abu Hassan Bani Sadr, who was ousted in 1981 for criticizing the regime as a dictatorship, and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, president from 2005 to 2013. The cabinet conducts the real day-to-day work of governance. Practically all new laws and the budget are initiated and devised by cabinet members, and then submitted to Parliament for approval, modification, or rejection. Former President Ahmadinejad and the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei generally supported one another, but in the last years of Ahmadinejad's presidency, the two were often openly competitive. In 2011, Ahmadinejad fired his Minister of Intelligence, Haider Moslahi, for bugging the offices of Ahmadinejad's Chief of Staff. But Khamenei exercised his authority and quickly reinstated him. The president responded by refusing to attend cabinet meetings, but he resumed his duties after 300 MPs urged him to respect Mr. Khamenei's decision. The two men are both conservative, but disagreed on economic policy issues, and a two-headed executive leaves room for internal disputes. The supreme leader, as head of state, is supposed to stay aloof from everyday politics, and Khamenei said as much when he praised the government in a 2011 speech, and stressed that he intervened only when he felt that expediency is ignored. However, each time the supreme leader gets involved in politics, he risks his ability to rise above the fray and exercise undisputed authority based on juris guardianship. The bureaucracy. The president heads a huge bureaucracy that has expanded over the years to provide jobs for college and high school graduates. It has doubled in number since 1979. Some of the newer ministries include Culture and Islamic Guidance that censors the media, Intelligence that serves as a chief security organization, Heavy Industry that manages nationalized factories, and Reconstruction that expands social services and sees that Islam extends into the countryside. The clergy dominates the bureaucracy, just as it controls the presidency. Most senior ministries, Intelligence, Interior, Justice, Culture, and Islamic Guidance, are headed by clerics, and other posts are often given to their relatives. Semi-public institutions. These groups are theoretically autonomous, but they are directed by clerics appointed personally by the supreme leader. They are generally called foundations, with such names as the Foundation for the Oppressed and Disabled, the Martyrs Foundation, and the Foundation for the Publication of Imam Khomeini's Works. They are tax-exempt and are reputed to have a great deal of income. Most of the property they supervise was confiscated from the pre-1979 elite. Because they were run by people with strong connections to the governments, these organizations are called parastatals, or bonyads, which trace their roots to royal foundations established by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. These bonyads invested in property development, which catered to the middle and upper classes. After the 1979 revolution, the bonyads were nationalized and renamed with the intention of redistributing income to the poor and families of martyrs, those killed in the service of the country. They received land confiscated from those who did not support the government, and so many gained considerable wealth as a consequence. Today there are over 100 bonyads, and they are criticized for many of the same reasons as earlier organizations. As charity organizations, they are supposed to provide social services to the poor and needy, but without direct government supervision, no one knows how much or to whom this help is given. They have been accused of funneling their money to support the regime and of turning to commercial activities since the death of Ayatollah Khomeini. Others criticize bonyads for unfairly competing with private companies, since boneyad firms have political connections that prevent private firms from succeeding. The legislature, the Majlis. For most of its recent history, Iran has had a unicameral legislature, the Majlis, although in some ways the assemblies of religious experts has functioned as an upper house since 1989, when its membership was expanded to 86 elected representatives. Both the Majlis and the Assembly are directly elected by the people. The Majlis was first created by the Constitution of 1906, when it was part of Iran's early 20th century experiment with democracy. The Majlis survived the turmoil of its early days, as well as the dictatorship of the Pahlavi Shahs, and was retained as the central legislative body by the Constitution of 1979. Although the 1989 constitutional amendments weakened the Majlis in relationship to the presidency, it's still an important political institution with significant powers. Some of those powers include enacting or changing laws with the approval of the Guardian Council, interpreting legislation as long as they do not contradict the judicial authorities, appointing 6 of the 12 members of the Guardian Council, chosen from a list drawn up by the Chief Judge, investigating the cabinet ministers and public complaints against the executive and judiciary, removing cabinet ministers, but not the president, approving the budget, cabinet appointments, treaties, and loans. The Majlis has 290 seats, all directly elected through single-member districts by citizens over the age of 18. The election of 2000 saw many reformists fill the seats through a coalition of reformist parties called the Khordad Front. They won 80% of the vote in a campaign that drew over 70% of the electorate. Many supporters of secular parties, all banned from the campaign, voted for the reformers since they saw them as better alternatives to religious conservatives. Before the 2004 elections, the Guardian Council banned many reformist candidates from entering the race, and the result was an overwhelming victory for conservatives. Significantly, control of the Majlis flip-flopped dramatically from the hands of reformers to religious conservatives. For the 2012 election, about 1,200 of the 5,000 candidates for legislative seats were disqualified, mostly reformists. The judiciary. The judiciary is headed by a Chief Justice, who must have an understanding of Sharia, so by necessity, he must be a cleric. The Chief Justice is appointed by the Supreme Leader for a 5-year term, and he is charged with managing the judiciary and overseeing the appointment and removal of judges. Beneath the Chief Justice is the Supreme Court, which is the highest court of appeals in the land. Judges in the Supreme Court, like the Chief Justices, are all high-ranking clerics who are familiar with Sharia. 2 very important things to remember about Iran's judiciary are, 1, the distinction between 2 types of law, Sharia and Canon, and 2, the principle of juris guardianship means that the Supreme Leader and the Guardian Council have the final say regarding interpretation of law. 2 types of law are Sharia, or Islamic law, was built up over several centuries after the death of the religion's leader, Muhammad, in the 7th century. Sharia is considered to be the foundation of all Islamic civilization, so its authority goes far beyond Iran's borders. It has incorporated the idea of many legal scholars and captures what many Muslims believe to be the essence of Muhammad himself. Overall, Sharia is meant to embody a vision of a community in which all Muslims are brothers and sisters and subscribe to the same moral values. The very foundation of Iran's political system rests in the belief that Sharia supersedes all other types of laws, and its interpretation is the most important of all responsibilities for political and religious leaders. The principle of jurist guardianship reflects reverence for Sharia, and much of the legitimacy of the supreme leader is based on his ultimate authority as the interpreter of this sacred law. Canaan has no sacred basis, but instead is a body of statutes made by legislative bodies. In Iran, Canaan are passed by the Majlis, and they have no sacred meaning. Sharia, then, is divine law derived from God, and Canaan is law made by the people's elected representatives. Of course, Canaan must in no way contradict Sharia, so the Majlis must pass responsible Canaan, especially since the Guardian Council, and ultimately the Supreme Leader, review the work of all legislature and apply the interpretation of Sharia to all laws passed. In a very different way than we have seen it applied in other countries, judicial review does exist in Iran. However, ultimate legal authority does not rest in the Constitution, but in Sharia law itself. Because Sharia is so complex, its interpretation is not an easy task, and it has been applied in many different ways. In Iran, the Ayatollah Khomeini's importance in shaping the political system is that his interpretation of Sharia came to be the standard that influenced all leaders that followed him. Supreme Leader Khamenei, the 7 presidents, and all other high officials. In other words, a core principle of the present-day regime is to accommodate Islam to a constitutional framework, as provided by the Constitution of 1979. The Islamic Republic Islamized the judicial code by interpreting the Sharia very strictly. The new regime passed the Retribution Law, which permitted families to demand blood money, compensation to the victim's family from those responsible for someone's death, and mandated the death penalty for a whole range of activities, including adultery, homosexuality, drug dealing, and alcoholism. The law also set up unequal legal treatment of men and women, and Muslim and non-Muslim. The government also banned interest rates on loans, condemning them as usury, which implies that people in need of loans are taken advantage of by the lenders. Although Khomeini argued that the spirit of Sharia calls for local judges to pronounce final decisions, the regime realized that a centralized judicial system was needed to tend to matters of justice in an orderly fashion. The regime retained the court structure from the Shah's government, keeping the appeals system, the hierarchy of state courts, and the central government's right to appoint and dismiss judges. Furthermore, the interpretation of Sharia has broadened gradually, so that the harsh corporal punishments outlined in the Retribution Law are rarely carried out today. Modern methods of punishment are much more common than harsh public retributions, so that the most lawbreakers are fined or imprisoned rather than flogged in the town square. The military. Immediately after the 1979 revolution, the Ayatollah Khomeini established the Revolutionary Guards, an elite military force whose commanders are appointed by the Supreme Leader. The Shah had built the regular army, navy, and air forces, and so the Revolutionary Guards was created as a parallel force with its own budgets, weapons, and uniforms to safeguard the Republic from any subterfuge within the military. The Supreme Leader is the Commander-in-Chief, and also appoints the Chiefs of Staff and the top commanders of the regular military. According to the Constitution, the regular army defends the borders, while the Revolutionary Guards protect the Republic. Both regular armed forces and the Revolutionary Guards were greatly taxed during the war with Iraq, that finally ended in 1988. The Basij is a loosely organized military that is formally part of the Revolutionary Guards, and it gained international attention in the aftermath of the disputed presidential election of 2009, when the opposition candidate, Mir Hussein Mousavi, accused the Basij of brutality as it contained the demonstrations and addressed dissidents. The word Basij means mass mobilization in Persian, and it dates back to the Iran-Iraq War, when the Ayatollah Khomeini asked for civilian volunteers to go to the war front. The militia was reinvented in the late 1990s when the government quelled the street celebrations when Iran advanced to the playoffs in the World Cup Soccer Championships in 1998. The Basij also helped the government contain student protests in 1999. Iran currently has about 540,000 active troops, making it the 8th largest military in the world. Much about the military is kept secret, but its advanced abilities and technologies have been shown through the building of long-range missiles. The Revolutionary Guard remains an important political force with its own ministry, army, navy, and air force units, and appears to have a great deal of say in Iran's nuclear program. The Guard is becoming increasingly independent and takes an active role in policymaking. A large number of former guards sit in the Majlis, and men with close links to the guards control principal media outlets such as the state broadcaster and the powerful Ministry for Islamic Guidance and Culture. In 2004, the guards showed their strength by deciding on their own authority to close down the airport in Tehran on the grounds that a national security threat was present. The guard's engineering arm, known as the Gorb, has been granted big state projects such as a new section of the Tehran metro.